It started like any other call-a-routine emergency in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I'm a fire captain, been in the field for over a decade, and that day, I was leading a team to respond to a reported house fire just a few blocks from the station. Time is everything in our line of work. Every second can mean the difference between life and death. We arrived on scene quickly, geared up, and got straight to work. No time for anything else. I parked my clearly marked fire captain vehicle near the edge of the street, just outside the gated HOA community, thinking it would be safe during the rescue. But little did I know, that simple decision would spark a chain of events I wasn't prepared for. That's where she comes in, Karen. Not the fictional kind people joke about online, but a real-life HOA enforcer who made it her life's mission to monitor every parked car, every trash bin, every blade of grass. While we were inside helping an elderly couple trapped by smoke, Karen was outside snapping pictures of my fire vehicle, muttering about unauthorized parking and rules being rules. I didn't know any of this until I came back out, sweaty, covered in ash, only to find my vehicle gone, towed, in the middle of a rescue operation. And all because it wasn't parked in a designated zone, according to her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm literally on duty, saving lives, and my official emergency vehicle gets towed by some overzealous HOA board member. And here's the twist: Karen had no clue who she had just messed with. She thought she was flexing authority over a rule breaker. But this time, she picked the wrong person, and the aftermath. Let's just say she wasn't ready for what came next. So I'm standing there in the street, gear still on, watching the tow truck disappear down the road with my department-issued SUV. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone reported it as abandoned or something. But then I hear her voice behind me, sharp, smug, and full of misplaced confidence. "You can't just park wherever you want, sir. This is a private community." I turn around, and there she is. Sunglasses on, clipboard in hand, HOA badge swinging from her neck like it's a badge of honor. She didn't even ask who I was, didn't notice the radio, the fire emblem, or the fact that I'd just walked out of a house filled with smoke. Karen kept talking, telling me how rules are rules and how she'd warned the tow company already about cracking down on unauthorized vehicles. I asked if she saw the fire truck and ambulance on the same street, and she waved it off, said those were parked properly. My vehicle, according to her, was obstructing the neighborhood's aesthetic. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Behind me, the family we'd just helped was getting checked by paramedics. Neighbors were standing around, some whispering, others clearly embarrassed. One guy even apologized on her behalf, but she didn't care. She was focused on her power trip. And the thing is, this wasn't even the first time she'd pulled something like this. A couple of residents quietly told me later that she'd towed delivery drivers, cited gardeners, even threatened to fine a mom who let her kids draw with chalk on the sidewalk. It was all starting to make sense. This wasn't about parking or safety. It was about control. She didn't recognize me, didn't care what I was doing. And honestly, I could have let it go until I found out what else she had done while we were inside that burning house. As I started asking around, a clearer picture began to form. Karen wasn't just an HOA board member. She was the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog. People didn't say her name loudly. Some avoided eye contact when she walked by. Tay noticed it that day too, how everyone tiptoed around her while pretending things were fine. But the real trouble started when one of the residents quietly handed me their doorbell camera footage. "You should see this," he said, almost whispering. I took a look. The video showed Karen pacing near my vehicle while we were still inside the burning home. She wasn't just annoyed, it looked like she was waiting. She called the tow company not once but twice, sounding more irritated each time that they hadn't shown up yet. She even mentioned making an example out of me. That was the part that really hit me. I was risking my life inside a house, trying to save an elderly couple, and out here. She was plotting to prove a point. I took the footage to my chief, who was just as stunned. It wasn't about the tow anymore, it was the fact that someone had interfered during an active emergency response. The report from the family we rescued made things worse. Their daughter said Karen had come by earlier, right before the fire. Trucks arrived and told them to move their car from the curb even while smoke was already coming from the back of the house. Meanwhile, their neighbors started reaching out. One man said Karen once locked a gate to prevent EMTs from accessing the dog park after someone fainted there. Another woman showed me a ticket Karen wrote up for unsightly emergency vehicle presence after a plumber's van broke down in front of her home. At this point, the situation wasn't just frustrating, it was dangerous. But Karen still had no idea who I really was. And once she found out, everything started to spiral even more out of control. Word about the incident started to spread faster than I expected at first. It was just whispers in the neighborhood, people swapping stories about Karen and what she'd done in the past. But when a local news outlet caught wind of what happened, things escalated. They didn't use names, but the headline said enough. Fire captain's vehicle towed. During active rescue community, outrage grows. That's when Karen's attitude started to shift. She tried to play the victim, saying she was just doing her job and didn't know it was an emergency vehicle. But the problem was, there were photos, video clips, even her own voice on a recording bragging about how she was cleaning up the neighborhood. Meanwhile, back at the station, we were reviewing protocol. Interference during an emergency scene is no small matter. And while the department doesn't usually get involved in HOA drama, this situation was turning into something bigger. Our DEPARTMENT's legal team was now in the loop. There was talk about policy violations, even safety concerns. And someone had flagged the possibility of obstruction charges. Karen, of course, kept doubling down. She sent a formal complaint to the fire department, claiming I had parked with disregard for community rules and intimidated a board member. That was when it got personal. She mentioned me by name. She found out I was a fire captain and started spinning a new story that I had used my position to harass her. What she didn't know was that more and more residents were quietly gathering evidence, screenshots, letters, and statements. Some of them had even tried to file grievances against her before. But they said she always manipulated the HOA board into brushing things under the rug. The tension was building fast. Karen was trying to cover her tracks. The department was getting serious, and the community was finally speaking up. And just when it felt like things couldn't get more chaotic, the HOA called an emergency meeting. The emergency HOA meeting was packed. People who hadn't attended a single board session in years were suddenly filling every chair, some even standing in the back. Tension hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Karen sat at the front like nothing was wrong, flipping through her notes, acting like she had everything under control. But then the board president, who usually just nodded along with her, asked to review new evidence submitted by multiple residents. That's when the energy in the room changed. One neighbor stood up first, holding up her phone, and played a voicemail Karen had accidentally left. In it, she was ranting about how they need to learn who runs this place and how even firefighters shouldn't get a free pass. A few gasps followed. Then another resident pulled out the doorbell cam footage, showing her calling the tow truck mid-rescue. You could see the smoke from the house in the background. But the twist that no one saw coming came from an older man sitting quietly in the back. Mr. Jacobs. He'd lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone else and rarely spoke up. He raised his hand and said, "I wasn't going to share this, but now I think people need to know." Then he pulled out an envelope and handed it to the board. Inside were documents showing Karen had used HOA funds without full approval to hire a private security patrol months ago, citing suspicious vehicles, many of which were actually service workers and even off-duty paramedics. The room erupted. Voices clashed, neighbors started shouting questions, and Karen finally snapped, yelling that she was just trying to protect the community. But it was too late, the damage was done. The board president called for a vote to suspend her, pending investigation. That's when Karen stood up and, with a cold smile, said, "You all think this is over. You have no idea what's coming next." The room fell into a heavy silence after Karen's threat. People exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether it was just an empty outburst or something more. The board president tried to keep things civil, but the energy had completely shifted. Karen stormed out before the vote was finalized, slamming the door behind her. That night, social media groups tied to the neighborhood lit up. Residents were finally talking openly. Screenshots, videos, and years of petty citations came flooding. One former board member even admitted they'd resigned after. Karen pressured them to overlook complaints that didn't fit the image she wanted for the neighborhood. The next morning, my department received an anonymous tip that Karen had contacted a private attorney to explore filing defamation charges against some of the residents, including me. But what she didn't know was that the city's legal office had already opened a file on her actions. The issue wasn't just the towing yet, was the pattern. It's interfering with emergency services, misuse of authority, and possible financial mismanagement of HOA funds were all under review. But here's where the real twist came in. A week later, just as things seemed to settle, I got a call from a reporter who had been digging into Karen's background for a follow-up story. She had uncovered records from another community Karen used to live in across the state. Same story, same pattern, nearly identical complaints. And it ended the same way. She left suddenly after an HOA scandal that never made it to court. When this came to light, the board had no choice but to issue a public apology and start a full review of HOA operations. Karen's resignation came quietly, slipped in through email late at night. She was gone before the weekend, but the real surprise. A few weeks later, a for sale sign appeared in her front yard, right next to a brand new fire lane sign the board had just installed in my honor. After Karen quietly moved out, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, more open. The emergency HOA meeting had shaken people awake. For the first time in years, residents started speaking up, forming committees, and actually getting involved. The board made real changes, 2 clearer guidelines, more transparency, and a new rule stating emergency vehicles couldn't be towed under any circumstance. They even added a training session about respecting first responders and service workers. Small steps, but they meant something. As for me, I didn't expect a fire lane sign with my name on it. I'm not one for attention, but it was a thoughtful gesture from the community. More than anything, it showed that people were finally standing up against the kind of entitled behavior that had gone unchecked for too long. The same neighbors who once stayed silent were now looking out for each other. A kid even handed me a thank you card outside the grocery store. Said his grandma was the one we rescued that day. That hit harder than anything Karen ever threw my way. Looking back, the whole thing was frustrating, even surreal. Who would have thought that doing my job responding to a house fire would get tangled up with HOA politics and a personal power trip? But maybe it happened for a reason. Maybe it exposed a deeper issue that needed fixing. Because, in the end, it wasn't just about a towed car or one person's ego. It was about accountability, community, and respect for the people who step up when others are in danger. So yeah, Karen may have tried to make a point, but in the end, she made the wrong one. And this time, the neighborhood didn't just notice, they made sure it never happened again.